History, even modern history, shows that religion and violence are not contradictions. In the 16th century, there emerges a new Christian denomination. Latin Christianity, already separated from the Orthodox Church of the East, splits once more into Catholics and Protestants. And in the name of Christ, they go to war against each other in the bloodiest conflict that Europe has ever known. A new age has dawned in Europe, a new image of the world, the Renaissance. Everything is in a state of flux. Astronomy and other natural sciences, art and architecture. The way in which people see each other and their world is radically transformed. The perspective becomes naturalistic, realistic. Courageous seafarers, especially the Portuguese, venture out into strange, unknown worlds. With new instruments of navigation, new maps, in 1522 Magellan's ships proved that the world is round. A time of upheavals in matters of belief too. The Bible, whose Latin was inaccessible to the common people, becomes the book of books, and a dissatisfied German monk unintentionally changes the world. Martin Luther does not want a reformation, he only wishes to reform. But that is not how it turns out. It is as though his time is ripe for more. A new invention, the printing press, a technical revolution which makes possible a spiritual one.
Was Gutenberg mit der Buchdruckerkunst macht,
Gutenberg's printing press, printing with movable type, encourages mobility and improves communication to an extent that was previously not just unknown, but unimaginable.
Nicht vorstellbaren und auch nicht gekannten Weise.
The moral authority of the Church, of the popes, has reached its nadir in the company of the Borgias. The children of Pope Alexander VI, Lucretia and Cesare, rule like their father through intrigue, murder, and violence. When this pope dies, open jubilation breaks out in the streets of Rome. The Augustinian friar Martin Luther despairs at the intolerable situation, the corruption of the Church. He is not a revolutionary, only a medieval monk, but a stubborn one who wrestles with theological problems. In all probability, he never nailed up his 95 theses composed in Latin to the church door in Wittenberg, however popular the image. After all, who would have been able to read them? What is true is that he sent them in the form of a letter to the Archbishop of Mainz.
Seine handschriftlich niedergelegten Thesen gelangen in einer handschriftlichen Fassung.
His handwritten theses reach Nuremberg in manuscript form. There they are translated from the original Latin.
Sie werden dort übersetzt und am Ende des Jahres 1517.
Then, at the end of 1517, they are printed and copies are distributed in vast numbers throughout the empire.
Auflage vervielfältigt im Reich verteilt.
Luther had nothing to do with this, and it certainly wasn't what he intended.
Einfluss drauf gehabt und das ist auch nicht in seinem Sinne gewesen.
The result is uproar. Luther is excommunicated. In 1521, after a staged kidnapping, the Prince-Elector Frederick III of Saxony hides Luther in Wartburg Castle, where he translates the New Testament into German. His forceful style has a profound influence on the German language. 1 year later, his text is printed with far-reaching consequences.
Luther isn't the
first to translate the Bible into German. In the 15th century, we already have translations. I can't just recall how many, into other national languages, including German. But Luther's translation, his translation of the Bible into German, is the one that really takes off, really catches fire.
A fire that Luther has not intended. His religious texts are understood as an inspiration to revolution. Thomas Müntzer debates with Luther and summons up forces that he can no longer control.
I do not come bringing peace, but the sword.
He who lives by the sword shall die by the sword, Matthew 26.
Initially sympathetic towards the insurgents, Luther then calls on the ruling princes to adopt stern measures in his tract against the thieving and murderous hordes of peasants. He does not wish to be associated with the brutalities of the peasants, and unlike Müntzer, he does not want a revolution.
Bauernkrieg, das ist ja ein
The Peasants' War is just a name, and it gives the wrong impression. There wasn't a war as we understand the term, rather an unknown number of isolated uprisings. These peasants' revolts constitute a tradition going back into the 14th and 15th centuries.
But what the princes actually do is also not what Luther intended. Luther suffers under the Reformation as much as he influences it. He has no control over events. The Reformation attracts fanatics. Revolt against the clergy spreads like wildfire. Iconoclasts attack churches. In Münster, for a few bizarre months, Anabaptists rule a totalitarian state. They demand common ownership of property and prohibit marriage. When the riots are suppressed, the corpses of the ringleaders are displayed in cages. The Reformation spreads throughout Europe, dividing into ever new factions. Zwingli in Zurich, Calvin in Geneva. Even Scotland has its own local hero in the form of John Knox. And in London, Henry VIII seizes the opportunity and founds the Anglican Church, principally in order to secure himself a divorce. Reformation also means a reallocation of power. 1546, the Catholic Emperor is at war with Protestant princes, the first interdenominational war. After the Emperor's victory, a process begins which finally leads to a peacemaker's compromise. Subject citizens must adopt the faith of their ruler.
Der Augsburger Religionsfrieden schafft insofern etwas Neues.
The religious peace of Augsburg does result in something new, in that it strengthens something that already exists, namely, the status of the empire as a whole on a level above the warring parties. A level where the king and the imperial estates work together as supreme arbiters or referees, responsible for safeguarding peace and the rule of law within the empire.
Der Funktion eines Schiedsrichters dann dafür verantwortlich, den Frieden und das Recht im Reiche zu wahren und zu schützen.
Peace among Christians? A frightful error. In 1572, in France, the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. Actually, a royal marriage between the denominations is intended to bring about peace, but then betrayal. Protestant Huguenots gathered for the wedding are slaughtered in tens of thousands by Catholics, Christians against Christians. The denominations are at war again. It's about religion, but also about power. The new religious faith is an opportune means for ambitious princes to pursue their aims of dominion against the emperor, the kings, and the church. Then, in 1618, the prelude to a European catastrophe. The Prague Defenestration, actually the second. Protestants against Catholics, that too. In fact, a long, smouldering power struggle. The revolt of the estates against the emperor is a Bohemian tradition. This time they immediately elect a king of their own liking.
Der Erfolg des Fenstersturzes wird für uns greifbar in der
The success of the Prague defenestration can best be understood if we look at the Bohemian Act of Confederation of 1619. Here, we have a document in which the Bohemian estates define what they want in terms that we will later call a state. They don't abolish the monarchy, they need the king to legitimize their own positions. But they reduce his role to such an extent that this Bohemian king, in the concept of a corporate state as defined by the Bohemian nobility, ends up as nothing more than a master of ceremonies.
In Bohemia, the Protestant Union musters its troops. Alliances are made. Maximilian of Bavaria calls on the Catholic League to fight. Vienna. Bohemian Protestants refuse to recognize the newly elected emperor. War breaks out. Decades of conflict now explode. Emperor Ferdinand fights for Catholicism. Wallenstein, a brilliant general and entrepreneur. As yet, there is no such thing as a national army. Wallenstein recruits an army of mercenaries and fights on the side of the Catholic League for money.
Wallenstein ist derjenige, der sich in der Lage sieht,
when the emperor asks, "Can you provide me with an army?"
Kannst du mir ein Heer zur Verfügung
Wallenstein sees himself as ideally suited, as a private individual, a businessman, to offer this service.
Als Wirtschaftsunternehmer gleichsam diese Dienstleistung erbringen kann.
The first Catholic victories, the Bohemian rival king is defeated. The Protestants lose a series of bloody battles. In Bohemia, Catholic successes are followed by brutal suppression of the new denomination. But now, the Danes fear for the security of their power in Europe. They enter the war against the Catholic Habsburgs. The fortunes of war are fickle, but Wallenstein is almost always victorious. Again, the emperor triumphs over the Protestants.
Der Dreißigjährige Krieg ist wohl in den 1620er Jahren.
It's fair to say that in the 1620s, the 30 Years' War is mainly a religious war with powerful political groupings already getting involved.
In denen sich starke politische Interessenlagen mischen.
And at the latest, from 1630 onwards, the 30 Years' War becomes a secular conflict, a European power struggle in which religion still plays a role, albeit no longer a dominant one.
Machtkrieg, in dem Religion auch noch eine Rolle spielt, aber längst nicht mehr eine dominierende.
A war which perpetuates itself. The powers take up their positions. No one dominates for long. A power which achieves a short-term advantage is soon brought down by the others. And everywhere the armies of mercenaries who take what they need from the civilian population. War feeding on war, people say. Soldiers are seen as the brutal scum of the earth who kill for money. For the mercenaries, only money counts.
Diese Söldner übten ein Handwerk.
These mercenaries were simply plying their trade.
Sie achteten vor allem
Above all,
darauf,
they made sure they were paid on time.
Sold bekamen,
and if they weren't,
wenn dieser Sold
they changed
ausblieb,
sides.
wechselten sie die Fronten.
1630. Gustavus Adolphus, King of Sweden, enters the war. His power base, the Baltic region, is claimed by the Catholics, a mistake. The Swedish monarch is now the standard-bearer for the Protestant cause, and luck is on his side. An irony of fate. Wallenstein has just been dismissed by the emperor, a concession to the Jesuits, the Spaniards, and the estates who hate him. In 1631, Catholic forces besiege and then storm the city of Magdeburg. What happens there is without parallel even for the 30 Years' War. An orgy of brutality. The city is razed to the ground, the population virtually completely slaughtered. Gustavus Adolphus, the Protestant from the north, is set on revenge. His victorious troops push southwards. Augsburg, a Protestant stronghold, a city where once the peace between the denominations was ratified. There the soldiers of the Swedish king are now greeted like angels of salvation. A hysterical hope in a land laid waste. But these men too will only bring death, misery, and devastation. The Swedish soldiers are also mercenaries. War is their trade. What the Bavarians suffer only a short time later comes close to the accounts of the few survivors of Magdeburg. The mercenaries are all alike. For the first time in the 30 Years' War, the peasants resist the mercenaries. The soldiers leave behind them a trail of devastation, no matter whether there is fighting or not, no matter what cause they serve. In this hour of peril, the call goes out for Wallenstein. There are many who distrust this vain and unscrupulous general, but he alone is capable of putting a stop to the Swedish advance. Desperate times demand desperate measures. The two commanders clash directly in southern Germany, a battle of the Titans, Wallenstein against the army of Gustavus Adolphus. The result, a victory for Sweden, but a victory bought at the price of disaster. In the Battle of Lutzen, Gustavus Adolphus is killed. A shock. The messianic leader gone? Rumors spread. He isn't really dead. The Swedes are now losing battles, but they believe they can still secure their influence by negotiation. They are deceived. At this time, nothing is stable. Wallenstein's officers have to swear personal allegiance to him, even if this conflicts with orders from the emperor.
So ist es auch bei Wallenstein der Fall gewesen, der seine unternehmerische Leistung.
In the case of Wallenstein, he was always successful in his business ventures. But when it came down to it, maybe it wasn't the money that mattered after all.
Salopp formulieren will, am Ende dann gar nicht mehr so sehr auf
but
das
rather,
Geld
for instance,
kam,
becoming the Duke of Mecklenburg, a promotion in social rank which put him on a par with the princes of the Holy Roman Empire.
Sozialen Aufstieg zu schaffen, der ihn den Reichsfürsten des Heiligen Römischen Reiches gleichstellte.
Wallenstein has grown too powerful. What are his real aims? Among other things, he is negotiating with the Swedes for a peace agreement. Does the commander want to become something more than a duke? Not only the Jesuits would like to be rid of him. The emperor orders him captured, dead or alive. The Irish captain who stabs him in Eger is only the long arm of the numerous enemies in his own camp. An inglorious end for this notorious commander of armies. The war continues. At the beginning, the Habsburg dynasty had sought war to secure their dominion. By now, they are fighting to retain their existence as a power. Then, in 1635, at the urging of Cardinal Richelieu, France enters the war. Once again, the fighting lays waste to South Germany and Bohemia. Not before 1648 do people finally grow tired of the slaughter. Sweden and France, the remaining great powers, guarantee the end of hostilities. The Peace of Westphalia is signed. The basis for the religious articles of the document, is the Peace of Augsburg of 1555. After 30 years of devastating war, a bitter truth. It's back to square one. And yet everything has changed. However, for the ordinary people, the signing of the treaty did not bring about peace.
Erst wenn der letzte Söldner ein Land verlassen hat, oder auch nur ein Dorf
Only when the
verlassen,
last mercenary has left the country, or even the village, does peace return for the common people.
weil das in Sachsen zum Beispiel
And because
erst
this doesn't happen
im
in
Laufe des
Saxony
Jahres
until 1650,
1650 erfolgte.
documentary sources there refer to the end of the 32 Years' War.
In uns überlieferten Quellen auch vom nun zu Ende gehenden 32-jährigen Krieg die Rede.
Finally, an end to the killing. The cost of the war, the destruction of a continent. The conflict over the right interpretation of Christianity leads to an orgy of cruelty which takes human beings to the brink of the abyss. The accepted worldview is damaged forever. A symbol of this is the gallows tree from which even wounded comrades, now useless as soldiers, are hanged. For the first time, there is something resembling war reportage, ruthless, brutal, realistic.
Der 30-jährige Krieg hat die Menschen seit der Mitte des 17. Jahrhunderts
Since the middle of the 17th century, the 30 Years' War has never ceased to be of interest, because it confronts us with an unimaginable range and intensity of cruelties.
konfrontiert worden sind. Die Zeitgenossen,
What people experienced at the time was handed down to those who came after in writings and illustrations. Illustrations which have no inhibitions about depicting cruelty in all its hideous detail.
Schonungslos alle Grausamkeiten zeigt.
For the civilian population, the presence of the soldiery, no matter under whose flag they are serving, means misery and death. Plundering mercenaries seize what they need. Marauding troops lay waste to the land, even where there is no fighting. There is no mercy, no restraint.
Dieser Krieg wird als ein grausames Ereignis.
This war is seen as an awful event,
Möglicherweise
perhaps
wie eine
something like a natural
Naturkatastrophe, die
disaster,
über ein Dorf,
which devastates a village
hereinbricht
and against
und,
which there is
gegen die
no
man sich
protection.
dann auch nicht wehren kann.
War feeds on war. The civilian has a greater chance of dying than the mercenary, so men from the starving, pestilential, ravaged villages volunteer for military service in order to live a little longer. Medical care is negligible. The wounded have little chance of survival, but it's still better than starving to death or being slaughtered in your own village. A European catastrophe. Most severely affected is the region which will later become Germany. How many deaths has the war cost?
Insgesamt wohl über 50%.
All in
manche
all,
Bereiche
probably 50%.
70-80%.
In some areas, population losses could go as high as 70, 80%, judging by the large number of deserted settlements left behind after the 30 Years' War. In other words, places where people have been living, but which, after the war, are no longer populated, abandoned, deserted.
But from the ruins of the wars of religion emerges the idea of the modern nation-state, a mechanism of power, a neutral structure standing above denominational conflict. Treaties, civil order, and the rule of law are to bring about peace, an idea whose consequences extend into our own present day. Hell is humankind itself. The struggle for religious domination leads to the abyss. In the name of the one true faith, man is capable of any imaginable cruelty. So reads the lesson of the 30 Years' War. By nature, man is and always has been greedy, selfish, and cruel. Only an all-powerful constraint compels him to keep the peace. Man is a wolf to man, writes the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes.
Hobbes zieht daraus die Konsequenz, dass der Mensch
Hobbes concludes that if man is to live in a condition of peaceful coexistence, he must be subject to discipline. He must be constrained in every aspect of his life by a power that can only be the power of the state.
Zu reglementieren sucht und dem friedfertigen Zusammenleben dienen soll.
To constrain the greed of man, Hobbes decrees the totalitarian state, an omnipotent monster, Leviathan, which imposes peace and dictates what may be thought, said, and believed, an idea which will bear fruit. Absolutism, the state ruled over by the French Sun King Louis XIV, one of the practical political consequences of the 30 Years' War. Rigid, majestic order. The jungle gives way to the garden. The state as a calmly ticking, finely oiled and neutral clockwork. Base instincts and conflicts of belief are held in check by the power on high, the new ideal of the age. In place of the bands of mercenaries hired when needed, we find standing armies, valuable instruments of the state to be used sparingly. Prussia, under Frederick II, is the ideal model of enlightened absolutism, a sober, rational state without an established church.
Die ganz große Tendenz ist,
The trend is quite clear. Perhaps Frederick the Great put it best. Each man should be blessed as he thinks fit, and so religion is shifted firmly into the private sphere.
Religiösen in den Bereich des Privaten.
The practical consequences. In the late 17th century, the Huguenots pour into Prussia, into freedom. Under Frederick II, there's a time when every fourth Berliner is of French origin, a monarchy on the make in which church and state are strictly separated. It's a matter of principle. In Prussia, Kant pursues the idea to its logical conclusion. His essay, Towards Eternal Peace, is a blueprint for the United Nations organization. Law should rule over power in a kind of world parliament, an idea which has found little favor with every superpower to date. The separation of church and state is now so taken for granted that the appearance of the Pope before the United Nations is a minor sensation. In the past, popes waged war. Today, the Pope has only moral power, not battalions. A long way, which has led from the Crusades of the Middle Ages via the 30 Years' War to the present day.